She refilled coffee cups for 2 years and never once mentioned she used to argue court-martials in front of a panel of colonels. Then, a 19-year-old boy she'd watched grow up got arrested for a crime the evidence didn't actually support, and the quiet waitress at the Wayside Diner walked into a courtroom and took the whole town's assumptions apart in 11 minutes. The Wayside Diner sat on the 2-lane highway running through Bellwood, a town of about 6,000 people that had, over the decades, settled into the particular rhythm small towns fall into. Everybody more or less knew everybody. Gossip traveled faster than the local paper could print it, and reputations, once formed, tended to stay exactly where they were set down. Dahlia Winthrop had waited tables at the Wayside for 2 years, and in that time had become one of Bellwood's quiet fixtures, the kind of person a town absorbs into its background without ever quite looking at directly. She was 38, composed, unfailingly polite, with a low, even voice and a habit of listening far more than she spoke. She remembered every regular's order, refilled coffee before anyone had to ask, and moved through the diner's chaotic breakfast rush with an unhurried calm that some of her coworkers found soothing and others found faintly odd, the way you find anything odd that you can't quite explain. Frank Delacourt, who'd owned the Wayside for 26 years, liked Dahlia fine. He also, in the unexamined way of a man running a business on thin margins, mostly thought of her in terms of her shift schedule. "Dahlia, can you pick up the Sunday double? Marcy's out again." He'd ask, the kind of request you made of someone reliable and didn't think much further about. "Of course, Frank," Dahlia would say, and show up early. Teresa Boyle, another longtime waitress, and one of the few people at the Wayside who'd actually become something like a friend, occasionally wondered about her out loud. "You ever notice she reads the news different than the rest of us?" she mentioned once to Frank, watching Dahlia skim a headline about a court case with an attention nobody else in the diner ever gave the paper. Like she's looking for something specific. Maybe she just likes current events. Frank shrugged. "Doesn't hurt anybody." Nobody in Bellwood knew that Dahlia Winthrop had once been Major Dahlia Winthrop, a judge advocate general corps attorney who had spent 9 years as a military defense counsel, representing service members in courts-martial from minor disciplinary infractions all the way up to the most serious charges the military justice system handled. She had cross-examined expert witnesses in front of panels of senior officers, picked apart flawed forensic evidence, and built a reputation within the small, insular world of military law as someone who did not lose cases she believed in, and who believed, fiercely, in almost all of them. She had left the service 4 years ago, after a case that still visited her some nights. A young soldier she'd defended against charges she was certain, to this day, had been built on incomplete and mishandled evidence, convicted anyway, by a panel that had wanted a clean resolution more than they'd wanted the truth. She had done everything right and lost anyway, and the weight of watching a system she'd devoted 9 years to fail someone she'd promised to protect had finally been more than she could carry inside a uniform. She had left the law behind almost entirely, moved to a town where nobody knew her name, and told herself that pouring coffee and remembering regulars' orders was its own kind of peace, smaller, quieter, but hers. It worked, for 2 years. Until a Tuesday night in late September, when Teresa's 19-year-old son Eli was arrested for armed robbery at the Gas and Go on Route 12. The facts, as Bellwood understood them within about a day, seemed simple enough on the surface. Someone in a dark hoodie had robbed the gas station's late-night clerk at knife point, grabbing cash from the register and fleeing before police arrived. Grainy surveillance footage showed a young man of roughly Eli's height and build. Detective Holt Ambrose, working the case under real pressure from a district attorney facing a tough re-election campaign that had made tough on crime the centerpiece of every speech, moved fast. Eli had no solid alibi for the exact window of the robbery, had once had a minor shoplifting charge as a 17-year-old that made him easy to frame as someone with a history, and lived close enough to the gas station to fit a convenient narrative. Within 36 hours, he was arrested, charged, and sitting in the county jail awaiting a bail hearing. Teresa came to the Wayside the morning after, hollow-eyed, unable to work her shift, sitting instead at the counter with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. "They think he did it, Dahlia," she said, voice cracking. "My boy, they think he held a knife to someone's throat for $200. He was home. He was home with me. I know he was home, but I fell asleep on the couch, and I can't swear to the exact time, and the public defender they gave him sounds like he's got 40 other cases, and mine's just one more file on the pile." Dahlia had listened to a lot of grief across a diner counter over 2 years. This was different. Something in her, quiet, careful, folded away for 4 years, began, slowly and then all at once, to unfold. "Tell me everything you know about the case," she said. "Every detail. What time, what evidence, what the detective said." Teresa blinked. "Why? What can you—" "Please." Dahlia's voice had changed, subtly but unmistakably, into something steadier and more precise than Teresa had ever heard from her. "I might actually be able to help." She spent that evening reading through everything Teresa could give her: the initial police report, a copy of the probable cause affidavit the public defender's office had shared, a printout of the surveillance still the DA's office was using as their centerpiece evidence, and by midnight, sitting alone at her kitchen table with 2 years of careful invisibility falling away page by page, Dahlia had found 3 separate problems serious enough to blow the case apart, if anyone competent got the chance to argue them in front of a judge before Eli spent months in pretrial detention on a charge that shouldn't have survived a first look. The surveillance timestamp, cross-referenced against the gas station's own maintenance log for a known clock drift issue the district hadn't bothered checking, placed the robbery 9 minutes earlier than the DA's timeline assumed. 9 minutes that, combined with a neighbor's video doorbell footage nobody had thought to request, put someone matching Eli's general description walking toward the station at a time inconsistent with him being the person who robbed it. The eyewitness identification from the clerk had been obtained through a photo lineup so suggestively constructed. Eli's photo the only one matching the loose, dark hoodie description given in the initial call, that any competent defense attorney should have flagged it as inadmissible on site. And the history the DA's office was leaning on, the 17-year-old shoplifting charge, had actually been dismissed entirely after Eli completed a diversion program, meaning it legally shouldn't be referenced in a probable cause hearing at all. Dahlia found Bellwood's public defender, Nolan Whitcomb, at his office the next morning. A young, exhausted-looking man, visibly buried under a caseload built for 3 attorneys instead of 1, going through Eli's file with the harried, insufficient attention of someone who simply did not have the hours in a day to give it what it needed. "I need 5 minutes, Dahlia said, setting a folder on his desk. Whitcomb looked up, confused. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "No," she said. "But I used to do this for a living, and your client is about to lose a bail hearing he shouldn't lose because nobody's had time to actually build his defense properly. I can help, if you'll let me." Whitcomb, drowning and desperate enough to take help wherever it came from, let her. The bail hearing was held 3 days later in Bellwood's small county courthouse, a room that had seen decades of routine, unremarkable proceedings, and was, that morning, unusually full. Word had spread, the way it does in a small town, that something interesting might happen. Teresa sat in the front row, hands clenched together. Frank had closed the diner for 2 hours to be there. Detective Ambrose sat with the prosecutor, confident, having handled dozens of hearings exactly like this one, and expecting no surprises. He got one anyway. Whitcomb stood to argue for bail, but it was Dahlia, sitting at the defense table as an advising consultant, a role Whitcomb had cleared with the court the day before out of sheer desperate necessity, who fed him the questions, and by the third exchange, the judge, an older woman who'd been on the bench for 11 years and had very little patience left for sloppy police work, was leaning forward with real interest. "Detective Ambrose," Whitcomb said, reading almost verbatim from Dahlia's careful notes. "Can you walk the court through how the photo lineup shown to the clerk was constructed?" Ambrose, comfortable, answered easily, and in doing so, described exactly the kind of suggestive, single-suspect lineup that any properly trained defense attorney would recognize as a textbook due process problem. Dahlia leaned over and murmured something to Whitcomb, who nodded and pressed further, walking the detective, question by careful question, into confirming that the timestamp used to build the timeline had never been cross-checked against the station's known equipment issues, and that the dismissed shoplifting charge had, in fact, been referenced in the probable cause affidavit despite explicit court records showing it should not have been. By the time Whitcomb sat down, the prosecutor's confident expression had entirely disappeared. "Your Honor," the judge said, looking over her glasses at the assembled room, "I have serious concerns about the evidentiary basis for these charges as currently constructed. I'm granting bail, and I'd strongly suggest the district attorney's office revisit the strength of this case before it proceeds any further." The gallery erupted into a wave of murmured relief. Teresa sobbed openly into her hands, and in the chaos of the room emptying out, Detective Ambrose approached the defense table, glaring at Whitcomb before his eyes landed, with dawning and uncomfortable recognition, on the quiet woman beside him. "You're the waitress from the Wayside," he said slowly. "You just took my case apart in a bail hearing." "I used to do this for a living, Detective," Dahlia said, gathering her notes with the same unhurried calm she used to clear tables. 9 years, military defense counsel. "I know exactly what a rushed, politically motivated case looks like when I see one, because I spent a career picking them apart. You should be more careful with people's lives than this." Frank, standing nearby, looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. 9 years. You did this. Actual courtroom law, for 9 years, and you've been serving me coffee refills for 2 of them? "I needed something quieter," Dahlia said simply. "For a while I did. I think I'm ready to stop being quite so quiet about it now." Word moved through Bellwood fast after that. People who'd known Dahlia only as the pleasant, unremarkable waitress at the Wayside began, with a mixture of embarrassment and genuine curiosity, to ask her about the years they'd never thought to wonder about. Whitcomb, overwhelmed and grateful in equal measure, asked if she'd consider consulting on a few more of his impossible caseload, at least until the county could fund a second public defender position. Teresa hugged her so hard and for so long, the first morning Eli came back to the diner a free man, that half the regulars pretended very hard to be interested in their eggs instead of watching. A week later, a woman Dahlia hadn't seen in 4 years walked into the Wayside on a slow Tuesday afternoon, still carrying herself with the unmistakable bearing of someone who'd spent a career in courtrooms and command posts alike. "Colonel Kerrigan," Dahlia said, setting down the coffee pot she'd been holding. "It's been a long time." "It has." Colonel Adelaide Kerrigan slid into a booth, studying her old colleague with something between relief and quiet reproach. "You disappeared, Dahlia. After the Ferris case, you just vanished. I heard you'd taken a waitressing job in some town nobody's heard of, and I thought, that can't be right. That's not who she is." "It was who I needed to be, for a while." Dahlia poured her a coffee without being asked, the old instinct not entirely gone. "I lost a case I should have won. I couldn't carry it inside the uniform anymore. I heard you won one here instead," Kerrigan said, a small, knowing smile crossing her face. "Word travels. Even out here. A bail hearing, evidence torn apart in 11 minutes, a wrongly accused kid walking free." She studied Dahlia for a long moment. "The law's not done with you, is it?" "Not really." Dahlia looked around the diner. Familiar, unremarkable. The place she'd let herself believe was the whole of her life for 2 quiet years, and thought about Eli, free and eating breakfast with his mother 2 booths over, about Whitcomb's overwhelmed but grateful face, about the particular, unexpected relief of having used the thing she was actually best at for someone who genuinely needed it. "No," she said slowly, "I don't think it is." She didn't quit the Wayside that week, or the next, but she started, quietly, helping Whitcomb's office when cases came in that needed the kind of careful, thorough attention an overloaded system couldn't give them. Evenings and days off, unpaid at first, then eventually formalized into something closer to a real position once the county finally, belatedly, found the budget for it. She never became loud about it. She still refilled coffee cups with the same unhurried calm, still remembered every regular's order. But Bellwood had learned, in the space of one bail hearing, that quiet was never the same thing as small, and that sometimes the person who says the least in the room has simply been waiting, patiently, for a reason worth breaking the silence. If this story of hidden expertise, quiet justice, and a defense nobody saw coming kept you hooked until the end, hit that like button. Share it with someone who believes the truth deserves a fighting chance, even when it comes from the last person anyone expected. And subscribe to Beyond the Silence Tales for more real-life inspired stories of the quiet people who show up exactly when it matters.
Hi, I'm Gwyneth Wynn, the owner and manager of Beyond the Silence Tales. She refilled coffee cups for 2 years and never mentioned she used to argue court-martials in front of a panel of colonels. Then, a 19-year-old boy she'd watched grow up got arrested for a crime the evidence didn't support, and the quiet waitress walked into a courtroom and took the case apart in 11 minutes. I'd really love to know what you think of this one. How did it make you feel? What stuck with me was that Dahlia's silence wasn't about hiding a talent. It was about surviving a loss the system caused her. It took someone she loved needing exactly that talent for her to trust herself with it again. Which moment hit you hardest? Have you ever seen someone step back into a version of themselves they thought they'd left behind for good? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if this story kept you hooked, feel free to like or subscribe for more from Beyond the Silence Tales.